Welcome back to the Alice Stewart Show, and with the midterms fast approaching, 20 days to go until the all-important Election Day, all eyes are on politics without a doubt. And my next guest knows politics better than many people in Washington and across this country. He is Roger Stone. Many of you have heard of him. He is a Washington insider for 4 decades, played a key role in the election of Republican presidents Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush. And we here in Central Arkansas are going to be fortunate. He is visiting Little Rock this evening to sign his new book, Nixon's Secrets. Roger joins us this morning. Roger, great to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And just first off, you know where all the skeletons are buried there in Washington, D.C., and you clearly talk about them in your book, Nixon's Secrets. What can people expect when they read your book?
The amazing thing about being a political insider for 4 years is the enormous disconnect between what the politicians know and whisper about and what the people are told by their government.
Right.
We've just been told a narrative of history that on so many occasions and so many issues is not the way it went down, whether it is how the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the fundamentals of the Kennedy assassination, the truth about the war in Vietnam. Whatever it may be, the American people have been fed a lot of bunk. So in my books, I try to tell some startling truths about what really happened. John F. Kennedy, he's a meth addict. I'll give you one example. We have this great view of Kennedy as charming, dashing, handsome. He's getting injected 3 times a day with crystal meth. His 2 primary doctors are trying to get rid of the doctor who's shooting him up, Dr. Max Jacobson, a very questionable character. So, I mean, just little things like that just aren't included in the big picture narrative of history.
And there's also some more information you have in your book that a lot of folks have. These are age-old questions that people have always been wanting to know, and you hold the key to these secrets. One of them, and this has been talked about most recently with the IRS situation, the missing emails, it's been referred to as the missing 18.5-minute gap on the White House tapes during Watergate. And you talk about that in your book. Why did it disappear?
What we've been told about Watergate, the mainstream media narrative, is a grotesque distortion of historical truth. A lot of different things going on in Watergate, but several things are going on at once. The Central Intelligence Agency and the military, very unhappy about détente, unhappy about China, unhappy about the SALT agreements with the Russians, really unhappy about ending the profit-making war in Vietnam where they're running drugs, are trying to get Nixon out of the way. Nixon is become cross-purposes with the Central Intelligence Agency, as Kennedy did. That's why I believe the Watergate burglar team is infiltrated and the break-in is sabotaged to purposely get caught.
And White House was such a tremendous dark time in our nation's political history, and so many people blamed what happened on obviously Woodward and Bernstein, and exposing it with the papers there, and Deep Throat for telling all the deep dark secrets. And a lot of folks say that Mark Felt was Deep Throat. I mean, first of all, you'll see in my book there is no Deep Throat. Deep Throat is an invention of Woodward and Bernstein, because they are getting illegal grand jury testimony leaking from the grand jury for their stories. Newsweek, just this week, found documents in the files for the movie producers who made the movie of their book that prove what I just said is true, that they had a specific grand jury leak. So they invent this idea of Deep Throat. It's not in their book proposal to Simon & Schuster, by the way, nor does it ever appear in their printing. And then Ben Bradley, the publisher, comes out a few years ago in an interview. It gets uncovered where he says there was no Deep Throat. There was no moving of flower pots or meetings in garages. None of that ever really happened. So Mark Felt comes along at a convenient time. He's had a stroke. He's broke. He says, I was Deep Throat. Well, he was one of their sources, but he's not Deep Throat. Al Haig is a source, Nixon's own chief of staff, is a source for Woodward and Bernstein. He is a shady character in the entire Watergate drama. He helps walk Nixon towards the exit for the military-industrial boys, and he goes and brokers the secret deal for Nixon's pardon. The 18.5-minute gap, 5 minutes by Rosemary Woods. The other 13.5-minute 2 gaps that make 18.5 minutes were made by General Alexander Haig, or he had it done. Well,
that happens to the tapes when they're in Haig's custody.
Right, and these are deep, dark secrets or questions that people have had for many years, and folks can find the answers to a lot of these in your book, Nixon's Secrets. My guest is former Nixon aide and noted political consultant Roger Stone. Roger, I want to ask you this. You were with President Nixon for many years, before, during, and after his time in the White House, and he left office clearly on a bad note, and you worked very hard, long and hard, to kind of restore his image and not rewrite, but make his people looking back on his history in a better light. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I had kind of an odyssey. My first campaign work ever was for Richard Nixon. Then I had the privilege of going to work for Ronald Reagan in 1976. I came back and worked for him again in 1980, and then again in 1984. Then I would rejoin Nixon for his post-presidential years. This was a far more complicated and complex man than people understood. He was brilliant, but he could be obtuse. He was bold, but he could be hesitant. He was confident. At the same time, he was paranoid. He was highly intelligent. He had enormous personal discipline and a drive to succeed, a drive to become president, a drive to emerge as a foreign policy senior statesman in his post-presidential years despite Watergate. He ends up advising Bill Clinton on the breakup of the Soviet Union and the situation in China. He ends up going on what are de facto diplomatic missions for the country. They call them informal visits, but when a man in his late 80s visits China, he's doing it for a reason.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to ask you this. In your book, is it a way of setting the record straight or telling the truth about him that a lot of folks didn't know, that didn't get portrayed?
You can look at Watergate and illegal buggings and break-ins and illegal campaign financing. I just described the Kennedy campaign. Nixon played the rules of the game as they were played. Bobby Kennedy wiretapped Richard Nixon's hotel room in 1960. Bobby Kennedy wiretapped the bugged the Republican National Committee using these devices where you aim it at a window. It's called the Big Ear.
Right.
This idea that Nixon was particularly dirty or particularly tough in the practice of politics is absurd.
Yeah, we see, quite frankly, Roger, we see a lot of this same activity today. It's just not reported similarly as it was back in that time.
No, politics ain't beanbag, but the point is Nixon gets held to a standard that Johnson and Kennedy and Stevenson and all these other candidates do not get held to a same standard. Yes, he was a tough competitor.
And Obama.
Well, but I mean, as Nixon says in the tapes about the Kennedys, these are the most ruthless SOBs I've ever come across.
Yep, and that's, as you say, politics ain't beanbag. You're going to be in Little Rock this evening at the Barnes & Noble, right down the street from the studio here at 11500 Financial Center Parkway at 7 o'clock, signing your book. What else are you going to be talking about? What are you going to tell folks?
I'm going to talk tonight about the little-known connection between Bill and Hillary Clinton and Richard Nixon, and the fact that Hillary was fired from the 1974 House Impeachment Committee. She was then Hillary Rodham for leaking and lying after she argued that Nixon was not entitled to any legal defense in an impeachment proceeding. And then I'm going to detail the fact that much later during the Clinton presidency, Hillary at least 3 times spiked an invitation from Bill Clinton to receive Richard Nixon and talk about the Soviet situation after Nixon returned from a trip there.
Well, folks here cannot get enough of the talks about the Clintons, so I'm sure you'll have a great crowd out there tonight.
We'll do a little Q&A. We'll sign some books. It's going to be fun. Awesome. So I hope folks will come on out.
Awesome. Great. I appreciate you. Roger Stone, always been a fan, so thank you for taking your time, and have a great trip here in Arkansas.
Alice, thanks many times over again for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Once again, Roger Stone, New York Times bestselling author, former Nixon aide, will be here in Little Rock this evening at Barnes & Noble here on Financial Center Parkway at 7 o'clock, signing his books and talking to folks about politics, including the Kennedys and the Clintons. We will take a break, and we'll be back with more here on the Alice Stewart Show right after this.